I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
For years, Diana's final wishes had seemed buried beneath history, sealed behind grief, protocol, and unanswered questions. Then, in one extraordinary fictionalized court ruling, everything changed. The judgment did not merely reopen an old royal wound, it placed Camilla directly at the center of it. A document connected to Diana had been deliberately withheld, the court declared. And suddenly, William was confronting a possibility far more personal than another palace controversy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William read the ruling in silence, and the first emotion that struck him was not rage but grief. The document in this case was a testamentary instruction, meaning a written statement setting out a person's wishes for possessions and personal matters after death. Inside it were directions involving sentimental objects, family correspondence, and items Diana intended to remain tied to her sons, rather than disappear into wider royal control. He reached one passage, read it twice, then lowered the pages. "She already told us what she wanted," he said quietly. Charles received the same legal summary, and the weight was immediate. His wife was named within a court judgment connected to Diana, while his eldest son was looking to him not merely as a father, but as the king expected to protect the crown. The monarch set the papers down without speaking. He understood why the moment mattered. This was not only about old property, but about whether a dead mother's wishes had been kept from her children, and whether palace authority had preserved that silence. Then the judgment turned darker. A documented correspondence showed that figures inside the royal household had known about the disputed material before William had been told. The prince stopped at one reference and felt the case shift. A sealed appendix remained restricted, yet its index carried a chilling description: Instruction concerning disclosure to the Prince of Wales. The title referred to William's senior royal role as heir to the throne, but here it appeared beside an order concerning whether information should reach him at all. Camilla learned that William had seen the index and immediately requested a private meeting with Charles. She did not issue a public statement. She wanted no aides present, no courtiers listening, and no carefully polished briefing between them. The queen consort knew the next conversation could determine whether the palace treated the concealment as an old mistake or a personal betrayal. And while the court had exposed the secret on paper, the real explosion was about to happen inside a family where Diana's name had never truly stopped carrying power. The judgment had names on it, but behind those names were decades of unresolved pain. For William, this was about his mother. For Charles, it threatened to reopen one of the most painful chapters of his life. And for Camilla, the ruling transformed an old royal shadow into an immediate personal reckoning. Long before anyone entered the same room, each understood that Diana was once again shaping the emotional future of the monarchy. William remained alone after reading the ruling, and Catherine found him quieter than anger could explain. Diana's possessions were never simply royal property to him. They were fragments of a mother he had lost young, carrying memories no institution could replace. The Princess of Wales, a title given to the wife of the heir to the throne, sat beside him without pressing. He finally admitted that what hurt most was imagining his mother writing something for her children, only for someone else to decide they should never see it. Catherine listened as he repeated the thought. She understood the wound was not about objects, it was about choice. Charles faced a different pain. For years, he had kept his marriage, his sons, and the monarchy's need for stability in separate compartments. But the fictional judgment had torn those walls down. Camilla sat opposite him behind closed doors and insisted there had been context surrounding the document. The queen consort reached toward him as she spoke, but the king did not take her hand. He left his own beside the folder, motionless. She saw the hesitation and understood he was no longer listening only as a husband. Then William found something that changed everything. Diana's disputed instructions contained a handwritten addition naming personal effects and insisting they be preserved according to her children's wishes. He read the lines, then passed them to Catherine. She saw grief harden into resolve. He was no longer asking whether his mother had been clear. He was asking who had decided clarity did not matter. Charles received another blow. A legal aid showed him a documented court record indicating the dispute may have gone beyond holding the papers. Years after the original restriction, someone had actively resisted disclosure when questions were raised. The monarch asked for the date twice. Camilla, still nearby, understood why that mattered. Deliberate resistance suggested continuation, not confusion. That date pointed back to one forgotten royal gathering, when William had asked a simple question about Diana's possessions, and a private decision followed before the night was over. To understand why the judgment struck with such force, the story had to return to the night, when one question about Diana changed everything behind closed doors. Every royal crisis has a moment that only looks important in hindsight. In this fictionalized story, that moment came years earlier during a private Windsor family dinner. William asked a simple question about several possessions belonging to Diana. The room changed. Charles hesitated. Camilla became unusually quiet, and before the evening was over, a private legal file was moved from one archive channel into restricted custody, the decision that would eventually lead directly to the courtroom bombshell. William had never forgotten that evening, even before he understood its importance. Diana's estate arrangements had already involved executors, meaning the people responsible for carrying out a deceased person's legal wishes, as well as personal belongings, correspondence, and decisions about what should eventually pass to her sons. The disputed forbidden will was palace shorthand in this dramatized story for a supplementary testamentary instruction, a separate document containing highly personal wishes beyond the more familiar estate paperwork. That distinction mattered because the disputed pages were not about ceremony. They were about memory. William finally asked Charles why one collection once associated with his mother had never been discussed with him. The prince expected discomfort, but not evasion. His father paused, chose his words carefully, and said only that some matters had been handled years earlier. The answer unsettled him immediately. He pressed once more, asking whether Diana had left instructions. The king avoided a direct reply, and his son understood that something in the question had disturbed the room far more than it should have. Camilla found Charles privately later that night and warned that reopening Diana-related records could undo years of fragile peace. She argued that old wounds had already damaged relationships deeply enough, and that dragging forgotten documents back into family life might create another fracture. He listened, but his answer carried a warning. Avoiding pain, the monarch told her, was not the same as controlling the past. The queen consort heard the distinction, yet she remained convinced that delay was safer than disclosure. Then came the decision that changed everything. Within hours of William's question, Camilla met privately with a senior household official and instructed that the disputed Diana file remain under restricted access pending family clarification. Restricted access meant the material could not be freely reviewed, even by those with ordinary archive permission. What began as a temporary precaution hardened into silence. Years later, the fictional court examined documented correspondence, showing that the restriction remained even after the original concern had disappeared. William now understood the timing. His own question had triggered the concealment. And once he realized that, there was only one person left he needed to face. There were no aids to absorb the tension, and no ceremony to soften what came next. William entered the private room carrying the court summary, placed it on the table between himself and Camilla, and asked one question: why? She had prepared explanations about procedure, timing, and protecting the family. But the prince was not interested in procedure. He wanted to know who decided that Diana's own sons were safer without her final words. William had requested the meeting himself after reading the historical correspondence attached to the fictional judgment. The court summary, a condensed legal account of the ruling and evidence considered, had given him enough to challenge any broad explanation. Camilla knew that before she entered. She also knew he had seen dates, instructions, and internal notes linking the old Windsor dinner to the restriction that followed. The queen consort sat opposite him and waited for him carefully. William did not raise his voice. He slid the papers forward and told her the problem was not that Diana's instructions were uncomfortable. The problem was that somebody had decided silence on behalf of her children was acceptable. He reminded Camilla that those pages concerned a mother's wishes, not simply palace administration. Then he asked again who believed William and Harry needed protection from their own mother's words. The prince's restraint made the accusation harder, not softer. Camilla answered carefully, but the emotion beneath her control began to show. She said the monarchy had already carried fractures deep enough to damage everyone involved, and she had feared another battle around Diana would reopen wounds that had never healed. Her intention, she insisted, had been protection rather than punishment. William looked at her and answered that protection without consent could become betrayal. She fell silent because the distinction struck directly at the decision she had defended for years. Then William produced the correspondence from the night at Windsor. Across one internal note were the words, "Retain without disclosure to W." Camilla recognized it immediately. She admitted, in that private conversation, that she had argued strongly against releasing the disputed material at the time. But she insisted Charles had known concerns existed, even if he had not approved every restriction that continued afterward. The admission shifted the crisis instantly. The king was no longer standing outside the question. William gathered the papers and told her the next conversation would happen with Charles present. This time, he said, his father would have to choose whether protecting his marriage mattered more than correcting what had happened to Diana's sons. The confrontation had broken the silence, but now the crisis moved toward the one man whose authority and history made neutrality impossible. Charles had survived public scandal, private grief, and decades of judgment surrounding Diana and Camilla. But this fictional crisis demanded something different. He could not rewrite history, and he could not remain only a husband or father. A court decision now demanded action from the crown itself. When William placed the disputed correspondence before him, the king understood that whatever he did next would be interpreted as a verdict on his family's past. Charles read the papers alone before calling anyone back into the room. Within this dramatized account, the crown's institutional response meant the practical decisions the monarch could make inside the royal household, including archive access, staff cooperation, and compliance with the court's ruling. The judges had determined the legal status of the concealed material, but he now had to decide how far the palace would go in correcting the damage. That mattered, because archivists were already being asked to identify every Diana-related record touched by the old restriction, and whether other family communications had been withheld under the same instruction. Charles removed his glasses, read another page, then put them back on. The pattern became harder to dismiss with each paragraph. He eventually reached Diana's handwritten instructions and stopped. For several seconds, the king said nothing. He closed his eyes because the words stripped away the legal language around them. Whatever arguments had once surrounded disclosure, this was still a mother trying to leave clear wishes for her sons. Camilla entered later and asked him one question she had clearly been carrying for hours. Did he believe she had acted maliciously? Charles looked at her for a long moment before answering. He said, "Intention did not erase consequence." The queen consort absorbed the words in silence. She had expected anger, perhaps even accusation. Instead, his measured judgment shook her more deeply, because it left no room to hide behind motive. Then Charles made the decision. He signed an internal order releasing every Diana document covered by the old restriction for appropriate legal review and, where permitted within this fictional scenario, disclosure to her sons. He also temporarily removed Camilla from any role involving sensitive historical family archives. The monarch understood the symbolism immediately. The palace could not claim transparency while leaving the same hands near the records at the heart of the controversy. William received the decision within minutes, yet there was no victory in his reaction. He simply lowered the message and sat quietly, because opening the archive meant learning exactly what had been kept from him. Charles had finally opened the door, yet what waited behind it would wound William far more deeply than the victory could comfort him. Victory did not feel like victory when William finally received the document. The legal battle, the confrontation, the palace order, everything suddenly became secondary to a few pages carrying his mother's intentions. He sat down before reading them. Catherine remained nearby but did not interrupt, and as Diana's fictionalized private wishes unfolded, the prince discovered that the greatest injustice was not financial or ceremonial. It was that something meant to connect a mother with her sons had spent years hidden from them. William turned the pages slowly, realizing how personal the disputed instructions truly were. The document contained wishes for letters, childhood keepsakes, family objects, and sentimental possessions that were to be handled according to the judgment of her sons. These were not merely valuable items. They were pieces of memory, carrying emotional weight no auction estimate could measure. The prince understood why the document mattered so deeply. It read less like a legal instrument and more like a mother trying to preserve a bond with her children after death. William reached one passage, addressed simply to "my boys," and stopped. He set the page down and walked away before he could finish it. Catherine remained silent, giving him space without leaving him alone. When he finally returned, the future king picked up the document again, but the anger in him had changed. She could see it. What had once felt like a fight against concealment had become something more painful, a confrontation with years he could never recover. Camilla received her own message elsewhere. Charles had formally removed her from access to the affected archives, and the wording left no room for misunderstanding. The queen consort sat alone after reading it, forced to face the consequence of a decision she had once described as protection. The restriction had not contained the past. It had magnified it. She now understood that silence, once prolonged, could become more damaging than the truth it was meant to suppress. Then William found another line that cut even deeper. Diana had anticipated disagreement over how certain personal objects might eventually be used and had explicitly placed final judgment with her sons. The prince read the instruction twice. He also discovered documented correspondence, showing that at least one earlier recommendation had urged disclosure of the disputed material. That advice had been ignored. Something shifted inside him after that. William no longer wanted another confrontation. He asked Charles for a private meeting, not as heir and sovereign, but as son and father. For the first time since the judgment, William stopped searching for someone to defeat and began searching for something far harder, an honest ending. The most important conversation of the crisis happened without lawyers, courtiers, files, or formal titles. William met Charles alone. For several moments, neither man spoke about Camilla. Neither spoke about the court. They spoke about Diana. The son described what it felt like to discover that his mother's wishes had existed within reach while remaining unavailable to him. And the father finally admitted that avoiding old pain had allowed new pain to grow around it. William had asked for the meeting after realizing that possession of the document could never return the lost years. He had the pages now, but he could not recover the moments when those words might have mattered differently. Charles understood that this was no longer mainly about institutional action. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an institution rather than one individual, could correct procedures and open records, but it could not repair trust simply by issuing orders. His son wanted acknowledgement, and he wanted it without another layer of royal language hiding the truth. William told his father he did not expect him to relive his marriage to Diana forever. He knew that history had already taken enough from everyone involved, but the prince said something had to remain beyond negotiation. Whatever pain existed between adults, her words as a mother still belonged to her sons. Charles listened without interrupting. The future king made clear that grief was not asking for revenge, it was asking for respect. Charles finally admitted what fear had done to him. For years, every reopening of Diana's story had seemed capable of reigniting conflict, pulling old accusations back into the present and damaging relationships he had fought to rebuild. The king confessed that this fear had made silence appear safer than confrontation. Now he understood the cost. What he had accepted as stability had allowed another wound to form beneath it. Then Charles made a promise. He told William that he would personally ensure every remaining document affected by the restriction was reviewed. Nothing intended for Diana's sons, he said, would stay hidden simply because its contents were difficult. The monarch knew that promise carried weight because it tied his own authority directly to the correction. William asked for only one further boundary. He did not demand Camilla's removal from royal life. He asked that she never again influence decisions concerning Diana's private legacy. Charles accepted without bargaining. The family had finally decided where the line would be drawn. Now millions beyond the palace gates were about to decide what they believed the judgment meant. By morning, the fictional court judgment was no longer confined to royal rooms. Diana's name dominated broadcasts, newspapers, and conversations across Britain. Yet the public fascination was not centered on legal language. It centered on something painfully simple. A mother had left instructions, her sons had not received them, and the silence had lasted years. The palace could control documents and schedules, but it could not control the emotional meaning people attached to what had happened. Broadcasters moved quickly between competing questions. Had the monarchy protected privacy or protected itself? Had Camilla acted out of fear, judgment, or control? And had William been denied something no institution had the right to withhold? Buckingham Palace, the monarch's official London residence and a public symbol of the royal institution, issued a fictional statement confirming compliance with the court determination and announcing a review of archive restrictions connected to Diana's estate material. That mattered because the crisis was no longer only personal. The palace now had to prove that its own systems would not preserve the same silence twice. William watched the coverage without satisfaction. Catherine remained beside him as commentators turned the family conflict into a national spectacle. But the prince refused to release any statement attacking Camilla personally. He told her that exposing what happened was one thing, using his mother's memory to punish someone publicly was another. The future king understood the danger. Revenge might win headlines, but it could also consume the meaning of finally receiving Diana's words. She agreed, reminding him that closure would disappear if anger became the only thing people remembered. Camilla faced the reaction in isolation. She watched Diana's name appear again and again, now tied directly to the decision she had once defended as protection. The queen consort could no longer separate public judgment from private consequence. Every discussion about transparency returned to her role, and every mention of William receiving the document made the original concealment feel more severe. Then one image captured the mood. A fictional morning newspaper appeared with Diana, beside the words, "Her final wishes," hidden for years. Copies were held outside Kensington Palace, as a small crowd gathered near the gates, some leaving flowers beneath her name. That evening, a major broadcaster closed not on Camilla, but on William, finally receiving the pages. The headlines had delivered their judgment loudly, but the monarchy's true verdict would arrive more quietly and carry far greater permanence. The crisis began with concealment, but it ended with acknowledgement. In this dramatized story, Charles did not erase Camilla from his life, William did not turn grief into vengeance, and Diana's memory did not need another war fought in her name. Instead, the monarchy finally confronted a simpler truth. Nobody had the right to decide that a mother's wishes were too inconvenient for her children to receive. Years of silence ended the moment those pages reached the hands they were meant for. Charles made the boundary permanent. Diana-related personal material intended for William and Harry could no longer be restricted simply because someone inside the household preferred silence. The final order, meaning the internal decision that fixed how the royal household would handle those records going forward, turned the court ruling into something practical. The disputed possessions, letters, and correspondence would now be reviewed or transferred according to her recognized instructions. That mattered because symbolic regret was no longer enough. The monarchy had to prove that acknowledgement could produce action. Camilla met Charles privately after the order was finalized. She no longer defended the original restriction in the same language. The queen consort admitted that what she had once considered containment had crossed into interference, and she accepted that she would have no future role in decisions concerning Diana's private legacy. The king did not end their marriage, but he refused to shield the decision that had caused the crisis. In that moment, loyalty was separated from protection. He could stand beside his wife without pretending every choice she had made deserved defending. William received the final confirmation with Catherine beside him. The prince read the letter once, folded it carefully, and said there was nothing to celebrate about years that could not be returned. She listened as he explained that the important thing was not who had lost, it was that his mother's wishes could no longer be silenced. The future king had reached the end of the fight without becoming consumed by it. That became the real verdict. Camilla carried the consequence of crossing a boundary she could never undo. Charles finally chose acknowledgement over avoidance. William recovered something greater than possessions. Certainty that Diana's voice still belonged first to the sons she left behind. The crown survived because it finally stopped pretending silence could control the past. And so the document, once hidden in darkness, became the very thing that forced the monarchy into the light, leaving Diana's final wishes where they were always meant to rest, not inside a locked royal file, but with her children. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.